Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a new project for this application. So we're going to go to File, New, and Project. And we're going to use a Windows Form application today. Visual C# is the language, of course. And what we're going to choose to call this thing is W3 Settings app. So W3 Settings app is going to be the name of this project today. And give it a home. Right. So we'll keep the solution name the same. Create directory if needed, and add to source control, and we'll hit OK. Alright, so we'll hit OK. And it'll auto-generate our first form when it's done thinking. So, just going to resize. So it auto-generates form1.cs, which is fine. And it gave us a form like this. And this is a good size for us to work with. What we're going to do is we're going to start off by adding a couple of text boxes, a label, and a button. So we'll go over to Toolbox. Start with a text box. I'm not going to put it at the top. Actually, I'll put it a little bit further down because I want to leave room up here to add a menu and a couple of some shortcut items as well. And so we'll be adding those later on. So for now, we'll just add a text box here, and I'm going to add 2 of these just by copying and pasting. Right, and I'm going to add a label. Put that label next to the first text box. And add a button. I'm going to put it right below. I'm going to resize it. Put it right there. And this one will be a save button. So for button 1, I'm going to change the text to save. And I'm going to give it its appropriate names. So we'll call this one BTN OK. Or rather BTN save. Makes more sense. And the 2 text boxes, we'll call them TB name. First one's TB name. And the second one will be TB Starship. So we have name and Starship. And the label, we'll change it to LB title. Alright, so we have here name, Starship, and title. Now, we could run this, and we could see that this will appear as we want it to appear. And what we're going to do is we're going to start by playing with settings.settings, though. So this is what we get, right? Nothing new. I mean, just drag and drop, and our stuff appears the way we want it to appear, which is fine. So I'm just going to close this. Now, what we're going to do is start off with settings.settings. And we are going to play around with some of the settings here. So we're going to look for under properties. You should see settings.settings there. Double click on that. It auto generates this screen here for us to play with. Now, we're going to save our last size used for the screen here. So this first setting, I'm going to start by renaming it to last sized use. Right? Now, its type won't be a string. It will be a system.drawing.point. Because it's going to have a width and a height to it, or an XY, in other words, we want to be able to remember just the width and the height in an object here. Right? So it'll be easier to work with, this sort of thing. Alright, scope will be user. I mean, there's two options. There's application and there's user. User means that it's overwritable. Application is more meant for hard coding, read-only stuff. Now we'll give it a value. Like I'm going to change it to like 100, 100. Right? So this will be our variable last size used. Now let's add a couple more settings here. This one will be default name. It'll be a string. And for me, no lesson is complete without a Star Trek reference. So I'm going to say James Tiberius Kirk. And default starship. Also a string, user level, USS Enterprise. And so that'll be it for our settings. That'll be it for our settings. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to get these settings to interact with our application. Okay, so this was the settings file. Now, let's start using the settings file. Before we do, I want to also show you the resource file, and then we're going to actually get the resource file and the settings file to interact with the form at the same time. So above it is resource.resx, and if I double click on that, it looks very similar to the settings.settings file. There's only just, except it just has name and value. It doesn't care about the type. So we're going to add a few resource settings here. So for example, this very first one, let's call this one app name. So I'm going to use all caps, app_name for app name. And I'm going to say, welcome to week 3. I could have a comment related to this, but I'm going to leave that blank. Maybe some note for yourself to remember as you are updating this. Like, for example, I want this to display at the top of the form or something. Something that you might prefer. Now, we'll add a few more. All right, we're going to add stuff related to the pop-up dialog. So I'm going to create something called closing message. So the pop-up dialog will display this. And for this, I'll put like, are you sure? And then after that, make sure you saved your settings. So something like that. So are you sure? Make sure you've saved your settings. And the next one I'll add, we'll call it error manual. And we'll just say error RTFM. And one more. We'll say error message. And this will be error, you screwed up. All right, and that'll be our resource.resx file. Okay, so now that we have our resource and our settings files, we can do a Control S to save them, or they'll save automatically when we hit the Run button. Let's go ahead and use them in our form. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump back to form1.cs, look at our form again, and in previous exercises we went over together with forms, we focused heavily on the properties window here. And so we basically just looked at settings here to play around with, but there's another side to this as well. There's more than just settings that we can configure. We can configure event handlers as well. And so if we look carefully here at this icon that's a lightning bolt under the properties word, we'll see that if we click on it, it's actually our list of event handlers. And so we have a whole slew of event handlers available at our disposal. And I'm using the alphabetical order option as well, so A to Z, so I can read it easily, so I know where to scroll down to. You may have grouped options by default, right? I find it tricky to navigate the grouped options, even though they're nicely grouped together, so I prefer the A to Z approach in what I do. Now, anything I want in terms of an event handler, I can just double click on and it'll auto generate an event handler for me based on the name of the item that I'm double clicking on. And this lightning bolt is available to your buttons, your combo boxes, your labels, everything. So you can create all kinds of event handlers for all kinds of items at your disposal. Right now I have the form highlighted, so I have the entire form. So notice that I have all the little squared circles all around my form, so all the stuff here is related to my form, right? And you'll even see the word form up here just below properties, so I know which one I'm highlighting. So you gotta be very careful now that you have access to all kinds of event handlers. Be very careful what you're double clicking on now, because if you're clicking on the button but you're thinking about having something related to the form execute, you might be auto generating the wrong event handler. All right, so you gotta be very careful what's highlighted before you do anything. Now, in the form1.cs file already, there is a constructor that is auto-generated. And we are not going to play with the constructor today for the form. We're going to play with an event handler called load. So I'm going to look for load down here. It was probably the first thing that was highlighted because it's probably the most common one that you're going to start with. But here we have load. And so when I have load highlighted here, if I double click on it, it is going to auto-generate this form1.load event handler for me. So I still have form1, public form1, which is my constructor, but this form1load event handler, this is for upon loading the form onto the screen. That's what it's all about. So when I'm launching this thing onto the screen, it's going to execute whatever code's within the curly brackets here. Right? So what I could do here is start by retrieving some commands that are related to my settings and my resources and getting those to display. Right? So we'll come back to that event handler listing in a moment. We're going to add some more event handlers for the form, but let's start with form1load. So what I'm going to do here is, first off, I want to retrieve that app name title that I gave in the resources file. So that and put in that label that's in the form. So I would say lb title dot text is equal to properties dot resources dot app name. So remember, we called it app name. That was our own name, right? So now it's there. And I could run this thing and verify that it's there. So if I hit the start button, your label should say, welcome to week 3. Okay, it should say, welcome to week 3. Let's try a few other settings inside this load method. So we configured the label. We got to say welcome to week 3. What about the size now? So we talked about size. Let's get into working with the size. So this form has a size variable, right? Width and height dimensions. All I have to do is just say this dot size is equal to properties dot settings. Now I'm grabbing from the settings file. Before I was grabbing from the resources file. So now properties dot settings dot default dot last size used. But there's an issue because this is thinking it's some unknown namespace type. It doesn't know how to translate it. We know that it's a point object. A size object. So we have to cast it to the size object. See this size form dot size, that's a size type, right? So we have to cast it. That'll make the error go away. So now it's going to get the size of the window and resize it. We set it to like 100 by 100, so let's see how it adjusts the screen size for that form in a moment. Let's do a couple more retrievals of the settings. Let's grab the name and the starship variables that we set up as well. So we'll save those inside tb name and tb starship. So we'll say tb name.text is equal to properties dot settings dot default name, and tb starship dot text is equal to properties dot settings dot default starship. Okay, now you can save this and give it a try and see what happens. Yeah, check out the size here. It's actually, I don't know if I can drag it properly. Let's see. Okay, I'm gonna have to increase my size so I can drag it over, but it is really small. There we go. And I have a place to put my mouse. There it is. It was actually like this big. So 100 by 100. Not fun to play with. Right? Not fun to play with at all. But hey, we actually were able to manipulate the size of the window. Now, we did it in a bad way, but now what we're going to do is we're going to take it and do this in a good way. So that our user, when he or she resizes the window and closes this window and then launches this the next time, will have the proper size to play with. Right? Because it'll remember. We're going to set it up so it remembers the right size. Okay, so now the next step is to get this to remember the latest size after it's been resized. So the nice thing is that there's an event handler for that. Kind of like there's an app for that. Well, there's an event handler for that. So you can hear that little talk all the time now. So going back to my designer, highlighting the form itself, so making sure all the circles are surrounding the entire form. Going back to my lightning bolt, I should see an event handler for resizing. So on this one called Resize, or rather size changed. Rather Resize. Yeah, I was right. It was Resize. Resize. There it is, resize. So there's resize begin, which could be like do something upon starting to resize but not letting go of the mouse click or the mouse button. But we'll just take resize, which is basically like once you let go of the mouse button. So you have that full control over what you're going to do. So double clicking on resize auto generates a new event handler called form1_resize. I'll go full screen so we can edit this together. What we're going to do now is remember the new size. So now we're going to override this setting here. So inside here, we're going to say properties dot settings dot default dot last size used is equal to this dot size. And of course we have to cast this. Alright, but this isn't enough. We have to do one more step. We have to save it. We have to flush it back to the file system. So we're going to say properties dot settings dot default dot save. See, the first line just makes a change, but the second line of code says go ahead and save that change. It's kind of weird because maybe it's waiting for you to make a bunch of changes before flushing that to the system. Maybe that's the reasoning and rationale behind it, but that's the idea, is that you still have to save it no matter what. You still have to save what you're doing in the end. And so you can save this and try it out, and then try resizing and then running it a second time and a third time and resizing and so on, and see what the sizes look like. Alright, so what we're going to do now is we're going to run this thing, and we're going to resize it. So I have to resize before dragging. Now I'm going to resize it to the size I want. I think that's about a good size. I'm going to hit X, and it'll go away. I'm going to run it again. And now it remembered the last size. Right? Maybe I'll try playing with the size again and doing this third time. So let's try that. Hitting X, and then running it another time. And so it remembers the last size that I did. And I'll close that. Alright, so let's add another event handler. Going back to form1.cs. We're going to do something related to closing down this app. So hitting the X button. What we want to do is have a pop-up message come up saying, "Are you sure?" And to do that, we need to be able to harness that X that's in the top corner, right? The closing. So if we go to our event handler and we start looking for form closing, there's actually two. There's form closed and form closing. There's a difference. So form closing gets fired when you click on the X, but hasn't finished closing it yet. It's just clicking on the X and that's it. And so you may want to have a pop-up box there saying, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Which is what we're going to do right now. The form closed, the other one, will execute after the window has disappeared off the screen. Okay, so that's the main difference. So we're gonna take form closing, double click on that, and generate the form1 underscore form closing event handler. And in the previous class, we talked about going to MSDN to understand how the message box works. So msdn.microsoft.com, we did a search for message box, and we were able to look at how it works. And now we're going to apply that in action here. Right. So what we're going to say here is string message is equal to properties dot resources dot closing message dot toString. Right, so we have our message there. We'll do a caption. I won't grab it from the resources. We didn't add one in, so we should, but we didn't. We'll just say like form closing. Now we want to do our message box here. So we want to first create the message box, and we'll talk about the different options available at our disposal in a minute, but let's just create a simple message box with a yes/no option. So we're going to say var result this is going to look very similar to JavaScript. So var result is equal to message box dot show, and we'll put our message as the first argument, so message. So it's going to say, are you sure you want to close? The second one is the caption. Second argument is the caption saying form closing. Now, the third and fourth arguments are revolving around the buttons and the icon that will appear in this message box. All right. So for this third one is basically what kind of buttons do I want. So I'm going to say message box buttons dot yes no. There's a few here. Actually, before I even start typing that, you can see there's OK, there's OK cancel, retry cancel, yes no cancel. Those are your options. So I'm just going to say yes no. And I'll put this on new line for readability. And the last argument will be what kind of icon. So I'm going to say message box icon dot question. But before I do, let's look at the options here. So there's asterisk, error, exclamation, hand, information, none, question, stop, warning. I'm going to say question. Of course, we'll play around and see what they look like. So this line of code alone will get the message box to display. Now it's up to us to figure out what the user entered. Right? So we need an if statement right below. So we'll assume that yes means exit, let it continue on exiting, and that no will be to cancel the exit. And what we want to do is say if result equals dialog result dot no. Right? So if it's a no, we're going to say e.cancel equals true. Now, where did I get the letter E from? Well, the argument that came in the event handler says form closing event args letter E. Right? So these are my event arguments. So that's where I got the E from. And so now we can go ahead and run it. So I'm going to pull this away. Hit start. And so I'll bring it over here. If I hit X, here's my warning. So here's the icon right here, the question mark for the icon. Here's my yes, no, which could be yes, no, cancel, or retry, cancel, you know, those different options we had available at our disposal. Form closing goes up here. And are you sure? Make sure you saved your settings is right here, right? So all those things are there. If I hit no, continues on as usual, right? If I hit yes, closes the program. Alright, so next step we're going to add to this project is add tooltips. So whenever you mouse over something and you have a little message pop up, so we're going to add that right now. So the first thing we have to do is bring in an object into our form. It's an odd object, but if we search for tooltip, this object appears. And we're going to drag this into our form. I'm going to drag it to the bottom right corner. And just throw it there. Now, you'll see nothing appears on the form, but at the bottom, you have this little space here that has tooltip. And now, this is like a reserved space for hidden controls. So controls that are behind the scenes that will appear eventually, that will be used, but they're not in the forefront like our text boxes, labels, and so on. So we have a little space here to work with those things. So we're bringing in the tooltip object to work with. Now, if I highlight any item here, right, so I'm going to highlight the save button. And if I scroll down in my properties menu and I look for tooltip, Now it says here tooltip on tooltip 1. It is linking to this tooltip object that's in the bottom of our space. So this would not be here if I didn't drag the tooltip. If you try looking for tooltip before dragging that thing we just dragged on, it wouldn't be there. So now it's linked together. It's tooltip on tooltip 1. And if I go to the blank space and single click, so now I'm going to go to the white space here next to it. I'm not going to double click, just single click and start typing. So even if I hit the down menu, I could actually have multiple lines of tooltips here. But I'm just going to have one line, so I'm just going to enter in we are going to save our stuff. Here. Right? We're going to save our stuff here. And that's about it. Maybe under the text box, if I highlight the text box here, and I go back to tooltip, and I try entering a tooltip, I could say any current starship. Right? Maybe if I click on the name text box, I could go in and say, use your real name. Right? By the which way, whatever I add, I'll just hit start to run this thing. And let's see what tooltips appear. So here's our form. Mouse over save. We see that a tooltip appears. It says we are going to save our stuff here. Mouse over the the text box for the starship. It says any current starship. Mouse over the name. And a bit tricky. There it is. It was there. Use your real name. So our tooltips appear that way. So by bringing in the tooltip object, it's going to save all the tooltips that we have. We just sort of click on every individual control to get that to appear. I'll just say yes, I am sure. And those are our tooltips. Alright, another thing we can play around with the form is where do we want it to start loading. So there is a property here called start position. So highlighting the Windows form, the entire form, we see start position. And right now, it just has a default location. Let's see what my options are. So we can have manual, center screen, default, center parent. I'm going to say center screen. I'm going to try and run this again and see what happens. Now, on my side of the screen, it puts it right in the middle. So it actually put in the center screen here. So it actually remembers to center it. So you can have placement by default. And if you're not happy with center of the screen, you could put it wherever you want. But start position is another useful property at your disposal for placing this wherever you want. Another couple of things to look at are docking and anchoring. So docking and anchoring are related to each individual item, not the entire form. So you won't find it there. So if I click on save, for example, the save button, I can look for now docking and anchoring now. So I'll start with D, dock. It says none. I could play around with the location. I'll just pick on the button here. Let's see. If I hit the bottom, it just anchors it to the bottom or docks it to the bottom. Right? I could say, oops. I could say top. And let's see where it throws it. Right to the top. Let's see what it looks like on the side. Awkward. Very awkward, right? So we don't want that. None. Puts it back where it originally was. So docking's a convenient one to have. Anchoring, on the other hand. So anchor is top left. What if I wanted to just make it top? Right, so it doesn't do anything here. Maybe top right. Let's see what happens for the... Maybe I have to run this to actually see this in action. So we'll hit start button. Let's see what happens to the save button when we run it. There it is. Let's try resizing. It's hugging that right side. It's hugging that right side. So anchoring allows us to anchor it to any place depending on the resize. Alright, so our next step now is to start adding in some menu bars. So we left this space open on top on purpose to add in a menu bar. So we're going to do that. We're going to go to Toolbox. I'm going to search for bar. And let's see what comes up. So there's scroll bar, track bar. Now I want the menu bar. So search for menu. Menu strip is actually what we're looking for. So we're going to start with menu strip. I'm going to drag it. I'm going to put it in its usual spot, the top part there. Now you notice it kind of looks a bit weird. It just says that it's empty here. So it's because it's so flexible that we're the ones that have to customize it with the information we want. So we could start off by adding in common things that we usually see in Windows, because it's all about standardization. So typically we would see the word file here, right? So we'll say file. Now you notice that it has type here over here and type here down here. So type here over here is actually to add in another menu, like for example edit, right? But it's never enough to just have file and edit. We actually have options that pop down. So for this type here down here, we're going to have like new. We'll have open. We'll have save. And let's just have close. Right? So clicking on file, we have new, open, save, close. Of course, you may have a million different things there to go. But we'll just start off simple with these things. Right? For edit, there's custom, this is the usual stuff. So under edit, cut, copy, paste. Right? So let's add those in. So I'll just say cut. Copy. And paste. And let's add a new window. We're going to launch a new window there. And in fact, you could run this and see what happens. So now we have file and edit. File, nothing happens though when you click on any of these, because you can treat them as buttons that you have to add an event handler to. So I would have had to have double clicked on any one of these items or all of these items to add event handlers to all of these, because right now nothing's happening, right? Nothing's happening at all. So but this is a really simple way to add menus. Really simple way. Okay, so let's go ahead and associate some shortcut keys to this. So we'll pick on just a couple of them. So we'll start with like save and close. And then of course you could take this in any direction you want. The first thing we have to do though is allow for key presses to happen. So we need to go highlight the form and look for key preview. It's set to false by default. Let's change it to true. So key preview needs to be set to true. Now I can associate key presses with different areas. So if I go back to my file menu, I highlight save, I should see an option down here for key for a shortcut key. So shortcut key is set to none. If I hit the drop down there, let's make this an Alt S. So I'm going to check off the Alt, and I'm going to look for the letter S. I'll check S over there. So Alt S. And notice that Alt S pops up here to help the user. So that's automatically generated for you. That text is automatically entered. I'll do it again one more time for the close. So let's highlight close, and let's look for shortcut key. Right now it's none. I'm going to make this a control. So control Q. So I'm going to look for Q. Alright, and save it. So now control Q. Now if I run this, I go to File, Save, and Control Q. So what if I did this? I did just hit Control and Q. It would run this event handler. But of course we haven't set up an event handler yet. So we have to get that going. So that's the next step. Alright, so let's add the event handlers for everything. So first of all, if I wanted I'll do for open. If I double click on open, it's going to generate an event handler called open tool strip menu item click. If I go back to my form, double click on save, it's going to create a save tool strip menu item click. And if I go back to my form and double click on close, then create the close tool strip menu item click. So I wanted these ones to be created right now. Now, for open and save, I mean we're accustomed to seeing, these dialog boxes pop up that allow us to choose files, right? So we're gonna work with that. What we're gonna do is, actually we'll start with close. Close is simple. It's just this dot close. So we'll get that out of the way, right? But the other two are open and save, and what we need to do is we need to add open and save dialog controls to this form first. So we have to go back to form1.cs and back to our toolbox. And if I type in the word dialog, for example, there's a lot of them, but we have a number of these. So font dialog, open dialog box, page setup, print dialog. I'm going to bring in save file and open file. So what I'm going to do is the same approach we did a moment ago for the tooltips. We're going to drag over, and I'm just going to place in the bottom corner again. So now save file dialog 1 has appeared. And we do the same thing for open. So go to toolbox, open file dialog. Again, I searched for dialog, it's still there. So open file dialog, I'm going to bring it in, just drag it to the bottom, and it has added open file dialog 1. So now these are special objects. They're hidden, so you don't see them here in the form. You see them down here on this little space here. They're hidden because they only come up when they're activated, right? So they're in the background until we need them. So now the question is, how do we get these to appear? Well, let's go back to the event handlers. So I'm going to start with open. Double click on open. We have open tool strip menu item click. I'm going to say open file dialog 1 dot show dialog. Now we're going to talk about show dialog in a moment, but for now this is how you add it, and this is how you get it to appear. And that will make the open file dialog box appear. There's save, so we'll say save file dialog 1 dot show dialog. All right, and you can run this thing now and see what happens there. So if I go to File, Open, and it has my Documents folder popping up here. I'll hit Cancel because I can open any one of these files. Save. So Save has my Documents folder opening up as well here too. Right? But we also created a shortcut key for save, which was Alt S. So I'm going to hit Alt S, and notice that the Save dialog box popped up, right? And also, shortcut key for close, we did Control Q. Control Q, hey, are you sure that you want to exit? Yes, exit. So here, a bunch of quirks we just added on to make our user's experience just that much better, and it was really easy to do. Okay, so we've done the menus here. Let's do the right-click side of things. So the context menu. So if I go back to the form, and if I go back to Toolbox, I'm going to search for context. So context menu strip. I'm going to bring that in. I'll throw it anywhere in the bottom. It creates the context menu strip item, and it starts over here with creating, an empty menu. So this is empty. So now I have to add stuff in here that will be displayed upon right-clicking. And what I want to have here is just some common commands that people are accustomed to. So for example, I want to type in save. Then below it, I'm going to have close. Maybe I'll have a new window, and we're going to create a new window soon. You may have noticed that all of a sudden there's type here onto the side, because you can have submenus, as you may have noticed. So that's how you would create submenus, right? But we're not going to go that far deep into it, but you can play with that on your own time. So we have this context menu strip that we're going to get to display now. So if we run this, let's see what happens here. So what if I right-click? Nothing is happening though. Nothing is happening because there's one more setting that's missing to get this to display. So we got the context menu strip to display, but we're missing a particular setting. So there's one more setting that has to be added to the form. So we created this context menu strip item, but it has to be linked to the form. That's the thing. So I highlight this, and I look for context menu strip. Make it set to context menu strip 1. It's the only option there other than none. Now you can run it. And now you can right click and have your items appear. Of course, none of these are going to work because we haven't added any event handlers to them. So same process again. You double click on them and it creates the event handler. Right? So we won't do that right now, but that's what you would do. Right? But at least for now, we've got our right clicks going. So we could actually have some new things appear here. Okay. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to add in a few more toolbars, and then we're going to talk about dialog boxes. Okay, so we did the message box, which was a dialog box on its own, but we're going to create our own. We're going to create other forms and get those forms to launch. We're going to get those forms to launch from within this form. So one thing we want to do is, before we do that, let's look at the other toolboxes or tool strips available at our disposal. So I'll start by typing the word strip. And we played with menu strip. We played with context menu strip. There is tool strip, and there is tool strip container, but we want and status strip. So we want tool strip. So I'm going to drag tool strip. I'm going to put it right below the file, which is typically where it goes. And you have the type of menu like this, right? Really, it's a place for all of your icons. So let's see here. We can choose. We'll choose a button. So there's options here: button, label, split button, separator, different options, right? So I'm going to choose a button. So it has a generic icon there. You are expected to sort of search for, a disk picture for a save, or a little blank page icon for the new button. But that's the idea, is that you can go in and you can choose those through the properties, but you have to navigate to where your files are. You may have to actually add the images in yourself into the project first before you can search for them. But you can keep choosing, different things like button or a text box, right? Or a combo box, right? Now it gets really large, so I think we've... and also, if we go off the screen, it starts going downwards. So it gets really strange. So you gotta be very careful. So one of the things I will say is just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. And I think we've really botched this right now. Let's see if I can hit the delete button and get rid of some of these things here. There we go. You know what? Let's just add the text box. All right, that's good enough. So when we run this, and of course you have to double click on each one to create an event handler for them as well. So now you have your icons here. They're just generic icons. You have a little text box there to enter stuff in, like as if it was maybe a search bar, right? So you have those options available at your disposal, right? So that's the tool strip. Now the other thing is the status strip. Let's put this down here at the bottom, because that's typically where it goes. So now you could have like different things. Status label, progress bar. Let's say status label there, progress bar. Maybe that's sufficient. And now with the progress bar, you have to code it up, right? You have to tell it how much % has been completed, right? For whatever operation you're doing, whether it's a file open or file close. That sort of stuff that you get into as you build an application and you know what you want, right? But by default, this will just show 0, right? Tool strip status label 1, this is just a label. We could update as we go. So if we're trying to open a file, we could say we're about to open a file. Then we would say we're loading the file. Then we could say, you know, we finished loading the file. So just different messages could appear at the bottom as we're accustomed to seeing, you know, with other applications that are out there. So running this, see, we have just a generic text, tool strip label 1, which should be overwritten with custom text. And here's a progress bar that has no progress on it. Okay. So at this point, we've completed all possible types of menus available at our disposal. So what we want to do now is play around with dialog boxes, or rather new forms, and launching them into in this application here. We've done the message box dialog box. So now we're going to jump into dialogs versus windows and see how those work. Okay, so this next part is we're gonna create a couple of new windows or new forms to play around with. So I'm just going to close this off, say, yep, I'm sure. And what we're going to do is if we want to add something new to our project, same idea as last time around when we wanted to add new classes, we want to add a new form to this project. So if I go and highlight my W3 Settings app project name, right click, and say add new item. Right? So we added classes before. We want to add a Windows form this time. So Visual C# items, Windows form. By default, I guess I'll start with form2.cs. Right? And I'm not going to do anything special with form2.cs. I'm not going to add any event handlers. I just want to show you how to launch a window. Okay? Let's just, for clarity's sake, let's add a label. So I'm going to take a label, I'm just going to put it like right here, put the words hello world there, just so we can see. Oh, not that one. I'm not going to worry about the name for the label. I just want this to launch and then go back. That's all I care about. So I'm going to create an event handler for new window in my first form. So all I'm doing is just creating a new form, adding hello world. That's it. I'm going to illustrate how this works. So now I'm going to jump back to form1.cs. And remember under edit, we had like cut, copy, paste, new window. So I'm going to double click on new window. And it's going to create a new event handler called new window tool strip menu item click. All right, so if I want a new form to appear here, in this case form 2 to pop up with the hello world message on it, I'm going to say form 2, call it f, is equal to new form 2. And I want it to appear, so I'll just say f dot show or show dialog. Let's start with show dialog and see what happens there. And that's it. So now I can run this. Now I can run this. So I'm instantiating the second form, called form 2. I'm going to say show dialog. I'm going to put this back here. And I'm going to run this. And so if I go to edit, new window, it actually popped up over here. Let's see what happens. I can't click on the previous one. I only have this. I can't go back to my old one until I hit X. Now I have access to this. Now I have access to this. Right? So I go edit, new window. All of a sudden I no longer have control of the previous window until I hit X. Now, if I did f.show instead of show dialog, let's see what happens there. So if I go edit, new window, I now have two windows that I can work with. So I can still access that previous window. So show versus show dialog. In fact, let's make this a bit interesting. Let's add another form to this project. It'll be a login form. So we're going to add a new Windows form. So I'm going to right click and say add new item. It'll be a Windows form. I'm going to call this one login form. Okay, so it'll be a login form. So this will be a Windows form called login form. I'm going to put username and password here as my options. So I'll have a couple of labels, a couple of text boxes, and a couple of buttons. All right, so that looks like a typical login form size, right? So I'm going to add in labels first. All right, because this is static text, I won't care about the name, just the text that goes inside of it. So I want the text to say username. And I want to create another label. Just copy and paste. Control C, Control V. And this will be password. Right, so I have username and password. I need a couple of text boxes to appear next to username and password. So I'm going to go back to Toolbox. Look for a text box. And I need two of them. Right, I'll just Control C and Control V to copy and paste. Line them up nicely. Now I want to give IDs to these technically because I want to be able to match username and password. Right? So I'm going to change the name to be TB user and TB password. And let's add a couple of buttons, OK and cancel, or login and cancel will be a better one. So under Toolbox, add a couple of buttons. So we'll start with cancel, make sure that lines up nicely. And call this BTN cancel. And text will be cancel. Do a Control C, Control V, copy paste. This one will be login. And its ID will be not button 1, but btn login. Okay, so what we want to do now is add event handlers for login and cancel. Well, cancel won't really do anything, but we'll add it in anyway. So let's look at loginform.cs. It has none of the methods that we created in the previous login form, because of course it's a separate object. We just have a constructor, login form. We double clicked and created btn cancel click. What we want to do now is we want to go back and double click on login and have an event handler for login. Right, we want to have an event handler for login. Alright, now there's a number of ways we could take this. We could have this appear first, or we could have this appear after the current form that's there. Let's start with having this appear after doing like, say, new, right? So what we'll do is we'll do this dot close for both of them, actually, for both cancel and login, just so we get rid of it. So this dot close. Of course, you would verify your username and password, but we're not going to get into that in this exercise today. All right, so we'll let that be. Now, if I want to launch this, let's go back to form1.cs and for file, let's have new pop up this new login form. So we would say login form lf equals new login form, and we'll do lf dot show dialog. Let's force it to close before returning back. Right, so this is one approach to this that we're going to do right now. Okay, so let's run this. And see what happens. So file, new, and my login form appears. Oops. Can't go back. I'll hit login, goes away. So I have the login form. Okay. But what I want to show you is another approach to thinking about this. Because I mean, typically we have the login form first before loading the program, right? That's typically how it goes. So let's fix that. Let's get this to be loading in the login form first. So to do this, what we're going to have to do is go to login form.cs first, and for here, for the login click, we're going to change this so that it instantiates our form1.cs and loads that form. So we're going to say form1, call it f, is equal to new form1, because that original form we created was form1, right? Form1.cs, so it's form1. And we'll just do a f.show. Let's get it to appear. Or maybe better yet, closing that window should go back to a form, the login form. So let's say show dialog. That would be better. And so when we hit the login button, we'll assume this is the strongest security ever and have no password at all. And so we'll have it launch that. Now, but the thing is though, when I run this, it's still going to load that first form, form1.cs. It's not going to load my login form. So I have to fix that. So if I go to program.cs, which we haven't touched it at all, we just sort of left it alone, double click on that, I'm going to point you to main. In main, the last line of code says application.run new form1. This is telling me to launch form1 by default. I could change this from new form1 to login form. If I change that, now it's going to launch the login form first, and then it's going to allow me to navigate to form 1 eventually. So now I'll hit start. And so I have my login form. I could enter in, stuff here. If I hit login, now it has loaded. I can't access login form. It's still there, but now it's loaded form 1. Right? Now it's loaded form 1. Now I hit X. Go back to my login form. Log in. There you go. And to exit the program, I have to get rid of the login form. And essentially, we've covered a lot of things in this demonstration today. We've looked at the different settings available at our disposal to configure how the look and feel is, such as the location, settings, resources. We did the message box. We did the menu drop downs. We've done the right-click menus. We've done a lot of things here today. And so our next app will look more at command line stuff related to dictionaries, dynamic arrays, and so on.